It was supposed to be over. The stream had ended, the camera was supposedly off, and the moment had passed. But that's when Kyrie Irving kept talking. No filters, no media polish. Just a sentence that instantly sent shockwaves through the NBA, the kind of sentence you don't casually say unless it's been sitting inside you for years. Once it was out, there was no walking it back. This didn't sound like a random outburst or a heat-of-the-moment slip. It sounded practiced, heavy, like something Kyrie had been holding in while smiling for cameras, shaking hands, and pretending everything was fine. And the more people replayed the clip, the clearer it became this wasn't about one comment. It was about everything underneath it. Because that leaked moment didn't just hint at personal tension. It pointed toward power games behind closed doors, an unspoken locker room hierarchy, front office pressure, and a version of brotherhood that may have existed more in press releases than in real life. For years, fans were told the story was simple. 2 stars, 1 goal, 1 banner. But leaks like this don't happen in a vacuum, they crack open patterns. And once you start following that pattern, the breakup stops looking sudden at all. But to understand why Kyrie would ever say something like that, you have to go back to when Cleveland was actually his team, long before LeBron James came back and everything changed. Before the headlines, before the super team conversations, before Cleveland became a non-stop media circus, this was Kyrie Irving's city. When the Cleveland Cavaliers drafted him in 2011, they didn't just get a talented guard, they got a foundation. Kyrie wasn't loud, he wasn't political, he wasn't trying to build a brand bigger than the game. He showed up, put his head down, and balled. And in a franchise desperate for direction that mattered. From the jump, the team was shaped around him. The offense flowed through his hands. The crowd fed off his creativity. Even during losing seasons, there was a sense of patience because everyone believed the same thing. This was the guy you build with, not around. Kyrie didn't complain about roster moves. He didn't play media games. He didn't demand spotlights. He carried himself like someone who understood that real control comes from mastery, not noise. That's what made the connection so strong. Fans didn't just watch Kyrie, they invested in him. This wasn't a temporary partnership or a borrowed star passing through town. This felt permanent. Kyrie wasn't auditioning for a bigger stage. Cleveland was the stage. And for the first time in years, the franchise finally had an identity that felt organic. That's the emotional part people forget. This wasn't a sidekick fighting for relevance. This was someone who felt ownership. Someone who believed the future was being built with him at the center. And then the entire building shifted. Because the main character came back. The flip didn't happen quietly. It didn't happen behind closed doors. It happened in public, in real time, for the entire world to see. When LeBron James announced he was coming back to Cleveland, the news didn't break inside the locker room first. It broke on phones, on timelines, on TVs. And Kyrie Irving found out the same way everyone else did, scrolling, reacting, processing on the fly. From that moment, the story changed. Cleveland stopped being a basketball team and started becoming a stage. Cameras multiplied. Narratives hardened. Every practice, every quote, every decision suddenly carried subtext. The franchise that had slowly been growing around Kyrie was instantly rebranded, and the pressure didn't just increase, it became political. Who said what mattered? Who stood where mattered? Who got framed as the guy mattered? Overnight, Kyrie went from centerpiece to co-star. Not because his play dipped, not because he failed, but because the script demanded it. And that's where the tension really began. This wasn't about jealousy or ego, it was about control. Kyrie hadn't signed up to be a supporting character in his own career. He hadn't asked for his timeline to be reset or his role to be redefined by someone else's return. Suddenly, the future he thought he was building felt borrowed. The voice he thought he had felt quieter, and the organization's energy shifted in ways that were impossible to ignore. And the deeper LeBron settled in, the more the team started moving like it belonged to one person. Once LeBron James was fully back in Cleveland, the real shift wasn't just visible on the court, it showed up in how decisions were made. LeBron didn't move like a normal. Every season became conditional. Every move had to satisfy the present, not the future. And front offices don't argue with leverage, they adapt to it. That's when patterns started forming. Familiar faces began appearing on the roster. Players LeBron trusted. Players who fit his system, his rhythm, his timeline. The team stopped feeling like a long-term build and started feeling like a careful end. It wasn't chaotic, it was controlled. And when control flows one direction, everyone feels it. The coaching situation made that dynamic impossible to ignore. Decisions started landing with a sense of inevitability, like outcomes were known before meetings ever happened. When leadership changes finally came, they didn't feel debated, they felt confirmed. To the outside world, it looked strategic. Inside, it felt like temperature setting. One voice carried weight before anyone else spoke. That's when Kyrie Irving started seeing the difference between partnership and alignment. Playing next to greatness wasn't the issue, but partnership isn't equal when one person defines urgency, direction, and consequence. When one presence quietly dictates how fast things move and who moves with them. And Kyrie understood something important. This wasn't about basketball roles anymore. But the biggest problem wasn't even basketball. It was the culture that came with it. What really widened the gap wasn't a play call or a stat line. It was the world that suddenly surrounded the team. Kyrie Irving had always moved differently. Quiet routines, tight circles, a hoop-first mindset that didn't depend on cameras or clout. He wasn't interested in being seen everywhere. He just wanted space to work, think, and play. That approach had always fit Cleveland just fine until it didn't. Because with LeBron James came something else entirely, not just star power, but an ecosystem. Curated rooms, status-driven access, optics that mattered as much as outcomes. Conversations that felt political instead of personal. To some players, that world felt energizing. To Kyrie, it felt manufactured, not dark in some dramatic sense, just artificial. Like everything was staged for perception instead of substance. That's where people misunderstand Kyrie. This wasn't paranoia or some hidden agenda. It was discomfort. He could feel when energy was forced, when interactions were transactional, when authenticity took a back seat to image management. One guy wanted a quiet hoop life built on rhythm and trust. The other brought an empire that moved on timing, leverage, and optics. Those two worlds don't blend easily. And this is why that leaked moment hits harder now. Fans go back and watch old interviews, sideline clips, press conferences, and suddenly the pauses make sense. The short answers. The body language. What once looked like moodiness starts looking like distance. Because once the culture changes, the way you're treated changes too. By the time the team hit its stride, the structure was already set, even if nobody ever said it out loud. LeBron James was first. His voice carried further. His reactions mattered more. And everyone else adjusted accordingly. That's how the so-called brotherhood operated. Not as equals, but as a system with a clear center of gravity. Fans could feel it in small moments. A look on the bench, a pause in a press conference, the way certain answers sounded clipped instead of relaxed. Kyrie Irving wasn't hiding his irritation, he just wasn't performing comfort for the cameras anymore. And once people started replaying those clips, the tension became obvious. This wasn't chemistry issues, it was hierarchy. Nothing captured that better than the infamous father figure question. On the surface, it sounded harmless, complimentary even, but Kyrie shut it down instantly. No smile, no laugh. Just a hard stop. And that reaction mattered because it revealed something deeper. Kyrie wasn't rejecting guidance, spoken with the relationship changes. And when respect starts slipping, it doesn't stay private for long. Once the hierarchy settled in, the next layer of tension played out in public, quietly, strategically, and always just vague enough to avoid direct blame. This is where LeBron James's influence showed up off the court. Comments started floating that didn't name names but landed anyway. Lines about needing a playmaker. Hints that some guys need to grow. Statements that sounded harmless until you realized who they framed and who they call someone out. You let the headlines do it for you. And every time those quotes circulated, the spotlight shifted away from LeBron and onto everyone else, especially Kyrie Irving. Kyrie didn't hear criticism face to face. He read it. He watched it scroll across screens. And that's where the frustration hardened. Not because criticism existed, but because it was delivered through perception management instead of conversation. The kid label pushed that imbalance into plain view. On paper, it sounded supportive. Mentor energy, veteran leadership, but context matters. Kyrie wasn't a rookie. He wasn't unproven. He was a champion and an all-star. So when he was framed like someone still learning how to behave, it wasn't petty to take issue with it, it was symbolic. It showed who was allowed to define the story and who was expected to accept it. That's the real takeaway. When narratives are controlled, relationships stop being honest. They become performance. Smiles replace clarity. Silence replaces trust. And that's when things break. Because then came the moment that shattered trust completely. And it happened behind Kyrie's back. The moment everything snapped didn't happen in public. It happened quietly, the same way the biggest decisions in Cleveland always seem to happen without Kyrie Irving in the room. Word started circulating that the Cleveland Cavaliers were exploring trade scenarios involving him. No heads up, no private conversation, no respect for the fact that this was the player they once built the franchise around. Kyrie didn't hear it from management. He heard it the way he'd learned to hear everything through the noise. That was the breaking point, because this wasn't the first time. He found out about major moves the same way he found out about LeBron's return, from the outside, and once that pattern becomes clear, trust doesn't slowly fade, it collapses. Publicly, LeBron James moved fast to distance himself. Statements framed him as surprised, as disconnected, as someone who wanted things to work, but insiders pushed back, suggesting he knew more than he let on, and that contradiction mattered. That's when Kyrie made a choice that confused a lot of fans but made perfect sense to him. He didn't owe a courtesy call. He didn't owe an explanation, because courtesy had never been extended to him when it counted. So he stayed silent. He requested out. And when asked about it later, he summed it up in one sentence that said everything. "I didn't leave Cleveland," he said. "I escaped it. That wasn't bitterness. That was relief." And the wild part is, the second Kyrie actually left, the whole machine started breaking. The fallout was immediate and it was loud. Once Kyrie Irving was gone, the cracks everyone ignored suddenly split wide open. On paper, the return looked solid, multiple pieces, depth, flexibility. In reality, nothing fit. Injuries piled up, roles blurred, chemistry vanished. What once felt controlled now felt tense, reactive, and unstable. The vibe wasn't just off, it was toxic. Everything became harder. Wins stopped coming easily. Series that should have ended quickly dragged into battles. The dominance Cleveland once projected evaporated. Games felt heavier. Adjustments looked forced. And the margin for error disappeared because the balance that held everything together was gone. Without Kyrie, the system leaned too hard in one direction and it showed. The ripple effect didn't stop in Cleveland. Across the Eastern Conference, the grip loosened. Teams that once looked overmatched suddenly believed. The path opened, power shifted, and for the first time in years, the Cavs no longer felt inevitable. They felt vulnerable. That alone changed the league's trajectory. Then history repeated itself. LeBron James left again. Another exit, another reset. Cleveland was left empty, stripped of structure, identity, and momentum. And that's when the truth became impossible to ignore. The system only worked under very specific conditions. Remove one piece and the whole thing collapsed. Which brings us back to that leaked moment. The clip didn't create a story. It confirmed one that had been playing out for years. But Kyrie's ending isn't just he left. It's what happened once he finally chose himself. That leaked moment wasn't about shock value. Kyrie Irving wasn't just taking a shot or stirring drama. He was finally saying out loud what that era felt like on the inside. Years of smiles, banners, and sound bites collapsed into one unfiltered sentence. And once you trace the timeline, it all lines up. Kyrie builds the foundation. The power shifts. A hierarchy forms. Optics start mattering more than conversations. Trust erodes quietly. Kyrie leaves, and the entire system that looked unbeatable suddenly falls apart. That's not a coincidence, it's cause and effect. This story isn't really about choosing sides between Kyrie and LeBron James. It's about what happens when greatness comes bundled with control, when leadership turns into leverage, when partnerships turn into performances, and when one voice gets to define the reality everyone else has to live in. The leak didn't rewrite history. It exposed the feeling history tried to smooth over. So here's the real question, and it's one fans still argue about today. If it was truly a brotherhood, why did it always feel like one person held the remote?